Hello and welcome to our set of exercises based off of the Lesson 5 curriculum. If you look through the slides yourself, you'll see that there's a review of for loops, strings, string methods, and scanners. For today's purposes, since we've already covered these topics, I'll be skipping to the warm-ups, but you can go back and review these topics first if you'd like. The first warm-up asks you to create a for loop that prints out each letter in the string computer, so that each letter is printed on a separate line. You can pause the video here and try it for yourself. If you need a hint, try using a for loop that goes through each index of the string and uses the method .char@at inside of a print statement. Now let's look at the key. There are two ways of writing a program for this problem. Let's look at the first one. To make everything simpler here, we set a variable called word equal to the string computer. Then we used a for loop that ran from 0 to 1 less than the length of the variable word, which is why we use a less than sign and not an equal to or less than sign when we're setting our bounds for I. Inside the for loop, we use a print statement with word.char@I inside of it in order to print out the character at the index I with each iteration of the for loop. This means that since we're looping through every index of the string, we're printing out each of its characters separately, and they should come out on separate lines. The second method of solving this problem is very similar to the first, except it uses a for each loop instead of a regular for loop. If you're not too familiar with these, don't worry, just know that they can be used in this case to loop through every individual character within a string. That's why we don't have to use the method char@. It already knows that it's dealing with each individual character in order. Overall, it's a more concise way of writing this code. Let's look back at the warm-up slide. For the second warm-up, we're asked to create a program that will find the first position of the letter A in a string that says, "I eat Cheerios for breakfast." We're already given the hint that we should use the method indexOf when writing our code. Pause the video here and try to write a program that does this. If you're finished or you're stuck, then now let's look at the key. For simplicity, we set a variable equal to I eat Cheerios for breakfast and another one equal to A. All we have to do after that is use a print statement with the method indexOf inside of it. The way that we do that is by writing the name of the longer string, str, then .indexOf with the name of the variable we set equal to A inside the parentheses. For the third warm-up, we're asked to write a program that scans the value of a variable called n and calculates the sum of all natural numbers up to n. Just remember that n should be equal to a value inputted by the user via the scanner. Try pausing the video here and working through a solution. If you need a hint, try creating a variable called total that holds the value of the sum of all of the numbers. With each iteration of the for loop, we add on to this variable. If you're still stuck or if you're done, let's move on to looking at the solution. First, make sure that you import scanner at the top of your code, then create an instance of scanner inside the main method. Ours is called scan. We set three variables, num, count, and total, equal to 0. Num will store the value of the inputted number, which was defined as n in the instructions. Count will help us create a for loop that iterates through each number from 1 to the value of num by keeping track of which value we're currently at. Total will keep track of the total sum of all of the numbers we've looped through. So now, in a print statement, we ask a user to enter the value of n and then store that value in our variable num. Then we use a for loop to go through each integer from 1 to the value of num. Here we use the variable count instead of I like we usually do. Inside the loop, we add the value of count to the value of total. Finally, after the loop is finished, we print out the value of total. Now we'll move on to working on the practice problems for today, which range in difficulty from about the level of the warm-ups to some that are a little more challenging. For practice number 1, we're asked to write a program that calculates the sum of the numbers 1 through 8. If you're stuck, revisit warm-up number 3, because it's very similar. But try to pause the video now and write your code. On the key, we set a variable called sum equal to 0, It's going to hold the value of the total of all of the numbers from 1 through 8. Then we used a for loop that went from the number 1 to the number 8, adding the current value of I to the variable sum with each iteration. Finally, we print out the value of sum. It's not too challenging of a problem, especially if you felt like you understood the third warm-up well. Okay, so for the second problem, we have to make a program that asks for a string input from the user, and then counts the number of times the lowercase word hi appears anywhere in that string. We're already given the hints that we should use substrings and check to make sure the length of the string is at least 2. Try pausing here and writing your code for the problem. Let's look at the key now. First of all, remember to import and create the scanner. After you've done that, you can create a variable that stores the value of the input from the user. Next, we made a variable called count, which is initially set to 0, but will store the value of the number of times the string hi appears in the string inputted from the user. Inside a for loop, we check to see if the string hi begins at the current index. And if it does, we add 1 to the variable count. Finally, like always, we print the value we want to output, which in this case is called count. Time for practice 3. This is the last practice problem before one final challenge problem at the end. So here we're asked to take in a value from the user and find its factorial. If you're not sure what a factorial is, it's the value you get when you multiply all the numbers together leading up to one specific number. For example, like on this slide, 5 factorial, which is represented by an exclamation mark, would equal 120, because 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 equals 120. Try pausing here and writing the program. If you're stuck and need a hint, look at the first practice problem as well as the third warm-up, and try doing something similar, except using multiplication instead of addition. Once you're done, look at the key. Make sure that you've imported and created a scanner. Now, ask the user to enter an integer and store their input as a variable. Ours is called number. We also made a variable called factorial, which will store the value of the output that we're going to print out at the end. Now we have to find the value of that factorial by using a for loop. Our for loop goes from 1 to the value of the variable number and multiplies the variable factorial by the current index with each iteration. After the loop, we print out the final value of factorial. Time for the challenge problem. This one is definitely optional, so if you have extra time or you feel really confident in your abilities, definitely do it. Otherwise, if you feel like you need more practice, it could also be really helpful, but you don't have to. Anyway, for the actual problem, we're asked to write a program that takes in a string from a user that describes a sandwich. The string that you input as a user is meant to have the word bread twice in it, with something between them. Make sure that there are no spaces. The program needs to print out the thing between the 2 pieces of bread. If the sandwich isn't written in the correct bread something bread format, then it should instead print out, "That's not a sandwich." We're given a hint just because this question's a little different from the ones that we did before. Here we have to use 2 for loops, not nested for loops where one is inside another, but 2 for loops, one after the other. One of them should go forward from the beginning of the sandwich string and find the index where the first bread substring ends. The other should go backwards from the end of the sandwich string and find where the last bread substring starts. That allows us to find the beginning and end index of the thing that's in between the 2 pieces of bread. Try pausing here and writing your code. If you get confused, try using the answer key. It's not a big deal. It's a little bit more of a difficult problem. Okay, so here's the key for that problem. The first few lines create a scanner, ask for the user's sandwich input, and store that string as a variable called input. We create variables called first and last, which will hold the beginning and ending index values of the thing between the bread. We initially set them to -1 in case we can't find that index at all, and we can check to see if they still equal -1 later. The first for loop in the code goes through the string input from the beginning and finds the index where bread occurs, allowing us to find the location of the beginning of the thing between the bread. The second loop goes backwards from the end of the string input, searching for the index where the last instance of the substring bread occurs. This is also where the thing between the pieces of bread ends. The if statement at the end determines whether or not we have valid index values for our variables first and last. In other words, if we still have them equaling -1, or if they equal a real index value. If we do have valid index values, then the thing between the pieces of bread gets printed out. Otherwise, we print out, "That's not a sandwich."
Thanks for watching. These slides and the others in the series are available on our website and in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us through our email, ccagirlswhocode@gmail.com.